Well, you're not going to believe this because obviously I don't look old enough, but I first performed on the stage of the Grand Theatre 59 years ago in 1963. I was playing the juvenile lead in a play called A Party for Christmas, which was a Swansea Little Theatre production because I was a member. And they didn't have their own home, of course, in those days. They now have the wonderful Dylan Thomas Theatre in the Marina and are still producing excellent work. But in those days, they had to move from venue to venue. And this play was being directed by the inimitable Ruby Graham, who was a great friend of the Willis brothers, who actually owned the theatre in those days. And they gave her special permission to put on her performances here at the Grand. So in 1963, I appeared in A Party for Christmas. And in 1964, I appeared in a play called The Kingdom of God, playing the juvenile lead. And of course, I immediately fell in love with this amazing theatre and the magic of standing on that stage. I'd seen some pantomimes, and in my late teens, I was a great fan of the Rep Company here, with people like Peter Boyce and Anita Morgan, and Phil Sayer did a couple of shows in the Rep as well. And I used to come every week and watch it. But to be actually on that stage was magic. And I knew then that all I wanted to do was act. That was going to be my life. But my parents were very sensible people. They loved theatre themselves and did a little bit of performing and writing. But they said to me, you have to do something sensible before you even think about becoming an actress. And then when I was 19, my father died, which turned my world upside down. And I thought, I can't go to drama school. I have to do what he wanted me to do. So I went to the Swansea Training College, which was up on the top of Town Hill. And I trained to be a primary school teacher, appearing in the productions in the college, of course. And I started my teaching at Oakley House School. And then in 1970, I got a phone call from John Chilvers, who was then the manager and the director of the Repertory seasons. And John was hugely supportive of young talent in Swansea. And he'd watched me in my performances in the Little Theatre, and we'd formed in our teens the Swansea Youth Theatre. And we put on some incredible shows ourselves, which John had obviously come to see and supported us all the way. And so John knew me, knew what I could do, and he said, I'm doing the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, and I'd like you to come and play one of the schoolgirls. And he said, I will give you a contract and I will give you an equity card. Well, an equity card, of course, opened the door to a professional career and was very hard to come by. And so I couldn't say no. And I've actually still got that very tatty contract. Swansea Grand Theatre, Miss Eleanor Thomas, which was my name then. And it is the Esher Standard Contract for Repertory. It's dated 1970. It says that I am going to be paid £8.10 a week, which I couldn't believe, because not only was I doing what I really loved, but somebody was paying me to do it. You can't get better than that. And there is one clause in the contract which states that if you were earning less than £15 a week, you had to provide one day suit, 2 day dresses, a cocktail dress and an evening dress. You had to provide your own costumes. And I remember many years later, I came back to the Grand to run the wardrobe department. And we were doing a show, a pantomime, which the director, a female director, wanted costumed in-house. So myself and Tina Williams, were working like little beavers to make all these costumes for the pantomime. And we had 2 very big stars in that pantomime, and they were earning 4-figure salaries a week, while the rest of us were on a pittance. And I remember being summoned to the dressing room of one of them, and he said, "I haven't got any socks. Go out and get me a pair of socks." And what I wanted to say is unrepeatable, but I actually said, "Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Well, if you ask the management to pay you a little bit more, perhaps you could afford to buy your own socks." It didn't go down terribly well, I can tell you that. And I've got the picture here. The first show was the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. That's a picture, that's me there. And of course, playing Jean Brodie was the wonderful Jean Ferguson, who then went on to play Marina in Last of the Summer Wine. And we did a few productions together in that season. She was absolutely wonderful. And we also did Bless This House, which is an Einan Evans play, and Einan came to perform in it, and playing the lead was Rachel Thomas, 2 of Swansea's, Wales's most gifted and golden performers. And it was such an honour to be able to play with both of them. We would always have, the night after the day after the first night, we'd have the Evening Post and the Western Mail giving us a critique of the grand productions, which is unheard of these days. And it's a lovely, lovely critique of the play Bless This House. But I like it best because it says, "The other characters too contribute significantly, but of the young characters, Eleanor Thomas is outstanding." So I kept that for many, many years. So after we did that season, and I'd got my equity card and I could now be a professional actress, John said to me, "Eleanor, will you promise me you'll come back next year?" So I said, "Yes, give me dates and I will come back next year." So I went off and did other things, and I came back for the 1971 season. And the first show I did there was Hadrian VII, which is a play about the first English Pope. And John had spent an absolute fortune on the costumes, hiring the costumes. And he wanted 8 cardinals to walk down the theatre aisles in the auditorium and up onto the stage. And they had the most fantastic red cloaks, huge red cloaks. So he wanted them to process up the aisles. He didn't have enough actors in the rep to play these cardinals, so he went out and asked local amateur actors to come in, one of whom was a great Swansea character and used to do a lot of drag. And after the dress rehearsal, the leading actor complained to John, and he said, "The cardinals are wearing too much makeup." And he said, "In fact, one looks like a drag queen." So John knew exactly who he was talking about. So he spoke to them all and said, "Please, no makeup tonight. Cardinals wouldn't do that." And so that night we had the opening night, and the cardinals duly processed up the aisles and onto the stage. And as this one particular cardinal got to level with Hadrian, he closed his eyes. And he'd written 2 words on his eyelids, and the second word was "off." And I was playing an acolyte. That's a picture of Hadrian the Seventh, and I am there. So I could see everything that was going on. And at one point, I had to hold the papal crown, and I could just feel it shaking in my hand because we all just went, and, it wasn't well received by the leading actor. Of course, nowadays, young actors don't get the opportunity to do rep in very many places. I'm not sure that there are any theatres that do a long repertory season. We used to do 26 weeks a year in rep, and it was weekly initially, and then we went to a 2-weekly rehearsal and a 1-week playing, which was absolute, luxury. But I work for LAMDA, the London Academy, and so I meet up with some of the young actors who are training to go into professional theatre today, and they say, "Oh, what did you do in your career?" And I said, "Well, I did a lot of repertory." "What was that?" And then I explained to them that in weekly rep, you did a different play every week. So on a Monday, you would come in and you would run the show that you were going to open on the Monday night. And you would be given on the Sunday, you would have been given what part you were playing in the next week's show. So you at least could, in your spare moments, start learning that. Then on the Tuesday, you'd run the first act of next week's show, and possibly Act 2 if you had a chance in the afternoon. Then you'd perform the other play in the night. On the Wednesday morning, you'd do Act 2. Wednesday afternoon was a matinee of the current show. Wednesday evening was the show. Thursday, you would then run the rest of the play. Friday, you would have a sort of technical run and possibly a bit of a dress. And then on the Saturday morning, you'd have your final run of the show, and then you do a Saturday matinee and you do a Saturday evening performance, and then they tell you what you were playing next in the next week, and you'd start again all over. That was the system, and it was very stimulating because you got to play some incredible parts. I mean, when I did the 1972 season, I had some absolutely incredible parts to play, but hefty parts, an awful lot of learning. I mean, I can't remember my name now, let alone lines in a play, so how I did it then, I don't know, but you did, because that was your job. And I remember playing Becky Sharp in Vanity Fair, and I had 7 costume changes, and these were period costumes. I had 4 wig changes, as well as shoes, bags, fans, gloves, shawls. And I can remember, after doing a week of that and rehearsing something else that was huge in the day, I was so exhausted by the time I got to the Saturday matinee that I came off after the Saturday matinee, and all I heard was, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your half-hour call," because we had a half hour before we did the evening performance. And I can remember crawling under a piano in the wings and crying and saying, "I can't do this again, I can't do it." And one of the actors came and crawled in after me and said, "You can do it, you can do it." And John was always, a doctor theatre man. If you said you didn't feel well, you weren't allowed to not be well. And he'd say, "Oh, get on that stage, Dr. Theatre cures everything." And he had the philosophy, you were either on or you were dead. And we were always on. We made sure we were always there. So, it was hard, but it was absolutely wonderful. And you learnt from John an immense amount, because he was such an instinctive director. He was particularly good at comedy, and he taught me so much about playing comedy, which of course is one of the most difficult things to play. And I remember him giving me some piece of business in something or other, I can't remember what the play was, Butterflies Are Free, I think. And I said to him, "John, I don't know that this is going to work." And he said, "Eleanor, play it my way on the first night and see what happens. And if you don't get a laugh, play it your way after that. Well, of course, you did it on the first night. You did it John's way, and it got an enormous laugh. And you were there. You knew that his advice was absolutely spot on. And he was also a man of very direct speaking, because I remember one young actor who was deeply into method, and Stanislavski came along. And he said to John in one of the rehearsals, John, can you just help me here? What is my motivation in this scene? I don't understand my motivation. And John said, your motivation is to remember your lines, don't fall over the furniture, and think about your pay on a Friday. That's the only motivation you need. And you didn't have time to motivate, I'm afraid. It all had to come from your heart and your soul and your instinct. And then we had audience get-togethers after some of the shows, because the Grand Theatre Club was very strong in those days, and they supported us all through the repertory seasons, and you got to know them. And so we had a question and answer session with the cast on a regular basis through the season. One lady, I remember in one session, stood up at the back of the stalls and she said, Mr. Chilvers, they always called him Mr. Chilvers, Mr. Chilvers, I sit at the back of the auditorium and I can't sometimes hear the actors very clearly. What have you got to say about that? And he said, Madam, pay more and sit nearer the front. So he was always one who could sum up something in very few words, John. And of course, in those old days, the theatre, this is before the theatre was renovated, of course, and backstage was pretty run down. You had the dressing rooms, which were very basic, and you went up the stairs and there was a little hole in the wall that went through to the bar. So you could shout your orders to the bar and a hand would come back and give you what you wanted through the hole in the wall. And then down on stage level, there was the scene dock. And you went past the scene dock and you went into one of the houses, because here, this dual carriageway that's here now wasn't here, of course. It was a street of houses, a terrace of houses. And Con Murphy's office and the stage crew office was in one of these houses through the back. And they always liked to start the day with a Reed's meat pie. And so you'd come in for your morning rehearsal and there would be the smell of Reed's meat pies. They had to be Reed's meat pies wafting through the backstage. And we had rats. We knew we had rats because we'd seen evidence of them backstage, because it was, pretty dilapidated. But sometimes you'd see them gambling in the aisles as you were rehearsing on the stage. And we'd say, oh, John, we've got rats. And he'd say, there are no rats in this theatre, because obviously he didn't want the word to get out that there were rats. People wouldn't come. He said, don't be ridiculous. There are no rats in this theatre. And so he would put the notice of the next casting on the board, backstage, and it was always Miss Thomas, Mr. Armstrong, it was all very formal in those days. And then you'd have all the different characters and who was going to play the parts. And within an hour would be on the bottom of the list, and Ratty will play himself. So then another notice appeared on the board which said, by the order of the management, any member of the company found defacing an official notice will be severely reprimanded. Signed, John Chilvers. And very soon it was signed John Chilvers and Ratty. So, and I remember too, we did, I think it might have been the Bless This House or something like that. It was a Welsh play, and we packed the theatre, which was unheard of. and they had to open the gods. And I remember Con suddenly, just before the half, freezing in horror and saying, "They've opened the gods." He said, "I've left the rat traps up there." And so we had to rush up to the gods and clear away all the rat traps before they let the general public into the gods. As I say, that was before the redevelopment of the theatre and all the new building. So it was great fun, and we loved it. We had some very memorable people come and join us. One was Frida Jackson, who had been very well known in her day, and she came to play Mother Courage. And the stage crew had got this very hefty wagon from a farm in Gower, and they then built this huge structure on the top of the wagon. And we got to the first night, and it was the first time really that Frida and Viv Moore, who was playing her daughter, had got onto this wagon, and they pulled it onto the stage. And in those days, the stage in the Grand had a very steep rake. And all of a sudden, they'd forgotten to put the brakes on this wagon, and it started to roll very slowly down the rake towards the pit. And a look of horror crossed Frida Jackson's face. And she suddenly roared out in her wonderful voice, "Chaplain, stop that wagon!" And poor Gareth Armstrong, who was playing the chaplain, suddenly saw this wagon coming towards him and stood in front of it and tried to rescue the wagon. But then the stage crew sort of rushed on and put the brakes on, and a terrible disaster was averted, particularly as Viv Ellicott was in the pit because he was playing. And Frida had to sing the Song of the Great Capitulation at one point, and she was plucking a chicken while she was doing this. So I, as an ASM, had to go out to the joke shop and buy a rubber chicken and dutifully copy Deck's feathers on it every night so that she could then pluck this chicken while singing this song. And it was ghastly by the end of the week. It was absolutely stinking by the end of the week. And everybody said, "Oh, thank goodness we got rid of the wagon and we've got rid of the terrible chicken." But the following production was Oh What a Lovely War. And in Oh What a Lovely War, the generals go out and they are having a shooting scene. So they go bang, bang, bang. And all of a sudden on the first night, down from the flies comes Mother Courage's rubber chicken and lands on the stage. Sets everybody off. So the crew were always up to playing tricks on us, you know. But I remember in that one as well, there was supposed to be an explosion at the end of Act 1, and John had got a lifeboat maroon, which they said had to be put in a special metal box. And so we got to the first night, and it was the first time we'd used this metal maroon, and it was so loud that we thought it was going to blow the roof of the theatre. It was terrifying. And then, of course, you know, like 70 years of dirt came down from the roof, and we were all in white Pierrot costumes. And at the end of the first act, we were totally black. So we didn't use the lifeboat maroon again. But it was always great fun. You had to have something to make you laugh when you were working so hard. Also in the 1972 season, I got married, and my husband-to-be was running a theatre in Johannesburg in South Africa. And he suddenly rang me up one day and said, "I can come over for a week in September, let's get married." And I said, "But I'm in the middle of the rep season." He said, "Well, ask John Chilvers if you can have a day off to get married, and we'll do it." So I asked John if I could have a day off, and he said, "Yes, if you let us all come." And so he was very kind and gave me the day off to get married at Pantaguida Church in Swansea. And everybody from the cast and John and the crew were all invited to the wedding. And when we came out of the church, the crew had got the stage braces from the Grand and made an archway of stage braces all the way down the steps. So we had the Grand Theatre stage braces making an archway for us, you know, and the local people saying, what are they? What are those? Anyway, we loved it, absolutely loved it. And then we were performing Charlie's Aunt with the wonderful Freddie Lees during that week. And so, of course, I had to go back and perform in the night. And we hired the dress circle, and all the wedding guests that weren't in the show, of course, came and performed and watched the performance. And Freddie was absolutely marvellous. He slipped in so many wedding comments throughout the show that it was absolutely great. Viv Ellicott was our best man, and we made the front page of the Evening Post. So it was quite an event, and John was wonderful, as were all the company, because the thing about the Grand is you feel that you're part of a family. I mean, there were different actors every season. The crew, a lot of the crew were here for years and years and years. I mean, Splinter, I know, has been here nearly as long as I have. There was Brian Martin and, of course, Con Murphy. But you just had this feeling that you were part of a family. And even now, and it's quite a while since I've actually performed here, although I've done quite a few talent shows. We used to do talent shows for the youngsters. Ros Taylor used to put on talent shows for the youngsters in Swansea, and I used to compare them for her. And Alex Frith, of course, did the Bumbles of Mumbles, the wonderful Alex Frith. You all right, kids, she'd say? You're going to come and see my show now? Yes, Alex, we'll come and see your show. And you just felt you were part of something special, and there's still a warm feel about this place. When you walk in, you know some of the boys in the box office, you know some of the backstage crew still, and they all say, hi, how are you, you know. So I think it's why it's such a special place. You feel the presence of being in a family here. I can't explain it, but you do. And of course, there's the ghost. Now, people had always talked about the ghost in the Grand, and Viv had sworn that he had seen, or at least felt, the ghost on many occasions. And we were doing a production of A Streetcar Named Desire in the Rep, and I was playing Stella. And instead of bringing the tabs in at the end of each scene, they would just take the lights down. And in one scene break, I was lying on a bed and all the lights went down and it was pitch dark. And I was just attracted to this figure in the circle in bright white, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. And I thought, what a stupid woman. Why on earth is she wearing such a very bright, luminous colour in a theatre? You know, she's being very distracting up there in the circle. And she moved in a very strange way, and I was suddenly riveted by this figure in the circle. And all of a sudden she evaporated. She just disappeared. And then the lights came back on and I had to carry on acting. But at the end of the show, I told Viv about this and some of the other actors. And Viv said, oh, I think it was the ghost. And then a couple of nights later, I was up in the bar and I was talking about it to somebody, and they went up to the bar to get some drinks. And this old gentleman came over to me and he said, I was interested to hear that you'd seen the ghost. I said, yes, a lot of people think it's Madame Patty, of course. And he said, no, it's not. It's my mother. I said, really? So he said, yes, my mother was the housekeeper here. He said, you'd probably call it the wardrobe mistress, you know, or the company manager now. But he said she was called the housekeeper and she loved the Grand. But the company had to go to Ireland to put on a performance, and she didn't want to go. She had a terrible premonition that something was going to happen. But they made her go. And he said there was a terrible storm and she was drowned. But she had always sworn that she would come back to the Grand because that's where she was happy. And he said, so it's my mother's ghost in this theatre, and she always appears to people she likes. So he said, thank you. She obviously likes you. And then he went away and they came back with the drinks, and I said, wow. I said, I've just heard the most extraordinary story. I said, that gentleman over there, and I turned round and he wasn't there. And they said, what gentleman? I said, well, there was an old gentleman over there telling me that the ghost was his mother. They said, there's no old gentleman over there. And I had no idea who he was, but I now had some inkling of who this ghost was. And several years later, a television company contacted Viv and said they were doing a programme on ghosts. And could he get together some information about the ghost in the Grand and tell them some stories? And he said, well, I know somebody who's seen the ghost. Oh, lovely, we'd like to interview her, they said. So I came in. I came and stood in the circle here. And I said, here. I said, I saw the ghost here. And they were very cynical, you know. Yeah, great. Oh, that's a lovely story. Thanks very much. That's great. And I went. And that night, Viv rang me and he said, you're not going to believe this, he said, but they got a medium in the afternoon to psych the theatre out. And they put him down by the Madame Patty plaque. And he said, no, he said, there's no ghost here. No, there's no ghost. And they said, well, will you come up to the circle? So we went up to the circle, apparently, and he walked around. And then all of a sudden, he was drawn to this spot where I had stood in the morning, and he suddenly stopped and he said, here, there's definitely a presence here. And Viv said all these hard-nosed reporters froze and said, oh my goodness, that's exactly where that woman this morning said she'd seen the ghost. So he said, I think your ghost was there. So that's my Grand Theatre ghost story. Well, I talked about how dilapidated some parts of the theatre were in those days. And we had the stage door over on stage right. And we would go out of there after the show. And there was, again, another row of houses. And the bus station was very close. So you could always hear the buses revving up when you were doing a show. And you had the Volunteer Arms, of course, which was the Vols, it was known as in those days, which was the actors' pub. It then became the Singleton some years later when the Vols disappeared, but initially it was the Vols was our pub. And sometimes the plays would end after time had been called, so you had to sort of have a secret knock on the door, and they would open the door and let you in after time, and you'd go into the back room. And I remember one night one of the actors, new actors, came in and he went up to the bar and he said, I'll have a port and lemon, please. And the barman said, Gladys, the ballet are back. But it was great fun. And you learnt so much. I mean, I used to stand in the wings and watch Freddie Lee's. His comic timing was impeccable, and I just learnt so much from watching some of these actors who were exceedingly good, much better than me. And John, of course, as the director. So I felt that I'd learnt much more by being in this kind of repertory company than anything drama school could have taught me. I mean, I did my LAMDA training and I got my LAMDA teaching diploma, and I'm still doing that. But, you know, some of the plays that we did, I made a list of them. And in one season, for instance, in 1972, we did Who Killed Santa Claus, which was a farce, a sort of mystery farce. Then we did the investiture, which was all about Wales, was a sort of modern, factual play. We did Butterflies Are Free, which was an American comedy, in which there were only 3 of us in the cast, so we had huge parts. We did Vanity Fair, in which I played Becky Sharp and was on stage all the time with my 7 costume changes. A Streetcar Named Desire, in which I played Stella. The Entertainer, in which I played Jean Rice. She's Done It Again, which was another farce. Abelard and Eloise, in which I played Eloise. The Relapse, in which I had another major role and huge costumes. Charlie's Aunt, which was another period piece. And Adventures in the Skin Trade. And if you've done all of those shows in one season and you've played major roles in them, you've learnt an awful lot. And, there were memorable moments. I remember in Abelard and Eloise, she's in a nun's outfit at the end, a nun's habit at the end of the play. And I loved the play. I really did love that play. And it's a black stage, and there's one spotlight on her. And she has a beautiful speech at the end of the play. And especially in a theatre like the Grand, which has got a certain intimacy about it, when you've got the audience in the palm of your hand, and you can pause, and there's a tangible silence, and you think to yourself, as you're standing there, I am loving this. I am so loving this. This is what theatre and performance and the magic of theatre is all about. And I remember one night, we'd just done Abelard and Eloise, and I went back to the dressing room and somebody said, "Oh, Eleanor, there's a phone call for you backstage." And I took the phone call, and there was a gentleman on the phone, and he said, "I had to ring you because I've just come out of the theatre and I've watched Abelard and Eloise, and I just wanted to tell you that it was one of the most magical shows I've ever seen in the theatre, and your final speech brought me to tears. I wanted to come to the stage door, but I can't. I'm not brave enough to talk to you face to face and tell you how wonderful it was, but I didn't want to go home." He said, "I don't want to go home. I want the magic to go on, but I just wanted you to know how much I'd enjoyed the show. Thank you very much." And he put the phone down. So, there were absolutely magical moments. Yes, we had times when things went wrong, like the leg falling off the chaise, or Eric the garden gnome. We did, I think it was an Acheborn, and there was a garden gnome in it. And the stage crew loved this garden gnome, and so they would take bets on how many times they could bring it into a production. And Eric would suddenly appear in the most unexpected places, and you would corpse. And I remember in The Importance of Being Earnest, when the 2 girls are meeting in the garden, and we've got Swansea Parks Department to make us the most beautiful garden for this scene. And Gwendolyn, I played Cecily, Viv Moore played Gwendolyn, and she has to say, "Quite a well-kept garden this is, Miss Cardew." And there, of course, suddenly, sitting in the middle of the garden smiling at us, was Eric the gnome, which sent us off again. But the only person who actually told us off for corpsing, and it was the leg falling off the sofa in Vanity Fair, was Con Murphy, the stage manager, because we did corpse an awful lot in that show. And Tony O'Donnell, who's still a terrific actor and doing a lot of work still, we really did laugh. And it was a matinee, and when we came off, we were severely reprimanded by Con, who said, "These people have paid their money to see this show, and don't shortchange them. You're paid to entertain them, and they've paid as much money, and they are as important as people who come in the night. So, respect your audience." And the thing with the audience was, they were there every week. They had season tickets. They sat in the same seats every week. They knew exactly what you were doing. And if you met them outside, and they would recognise us if we were walking around town, they would tell you what they thought of your performances. And I remember in, I think it was the 1971 season, Gareth Armstrong, also gone on to have a stellar career in theatre. Gareth and I had been in one of the shows, I can't remember what it was, and the review had said Gareth Armstrong was adequate in the role of whatever it was. And some woman stopped us in town and she said, I know you were in the Rep in the Grand, aren't you? And I said, yes, we are. She said, you're very good, mind. We've seen all the shows, all of them. And this week, you were very good. And then she turned to Gareth and she said, but last week, Mr. Armstrong, oh, you were adequate. Because she obviously thought adequate was the highest praise you could give to somebody. So they did know you, and they would shout out sometimes. I remember we were doing Rebecca, and Maxim says, I had to say as Mrs. De Winter, so you didn't, I thought you loved Rebecca. And he said, loved her, I hated her, she was vile, she was evil, she was... And this voice comes out from the audience, oh, he didn't like her then. Or when we did the Entertainer, with the wonderful Gary Taylor playing Archie Rice, it was quite a thought-provoking play. And Viv Ellicott was playing because Archie sings quite a few songs in it. And he had a migraine on this particular performance, so he was sitting at the piano with his head in his hands like this. And this voice from the middle of the stall said, see, even the piano player's bored like me. So there were lots of comments that, brought the audience with us. But you knew your audience, and that was the joy of being able to entertain them every week. I mean, they'd sometimes, particularly, if the show was going on a bit, they'd pick up their bags and baggage because they'd been to the market or wherever to do their shopping, and they'd come with all their shopping. And then they'd get up with a great rustle of bags and things because they had to go and catch the last bus home, and the buses were all outside, of course, in the bus station, so you'd hear the buses revving up through many a production. But that was the joy of being in the Grand Rep. This was the Dolls of Swansea. This was when it was written for us, and that's me and Viv there. That's Viv, that's me. And it was a terrible play, and this woman from Neath was brought in to play the Madame of the Brothel. It was all about a brothel. And she said, John, I can't possibly say this line. And he said, what line is that? And she said, well, when they say to me, what do you do? And I say, I'm in the business of building temporary erections. I can't say it. And he said, why can't you say it? And she said, well, I'll never be able to hold my head up in Neath again. Viv thought that was absolutely hilarious. But anyway, I think she did say it in the end. But there we are. And being an ASM in my early seasons, I had lots of other jobs as well as just performing. We had the wonderful Barrington brothers who did the sets. They were fantastic. And I think they worked 24 hours a day. They seemed to anyway, because they would come up with these amazing sets. And then we had a stage manager, of course, and a company manager, and they would be tasked with finding the dressing for the set. We had some basic furniture and things here, but they would have to go out and get whatever was required to dress the stage. I know that Arthur Llewellyn Jenkins, the local furniture company, have always been massive supporters of theatre in Swansea, and they were always willing to lend you something to put on the set. But then you'd go round to other shops. My job would maybe to go and get something as a prop, and then you'd say, look, I've got posters for the Grand and 2 free tickets, so if you will lend us that lamp or that something or other, you can have a poster and 2 free tickets for the theatre. And they were very, very generous about it, and again, it was the whole community spirit that they rallied round, and they got things. I mean, like the farm in Gower that gave us the Mother Courage cart, and the council were good because they would, as I say, come and give us things, a park bench or plants and things like that. John was always suspicious. He hated having real plants on the set because he thought it was unlucky. And he would never have a Bible on the set because he thought that was unlucky. But other props we begged and borrowed, and local businesses were very generous. There was always community support. They would put up huge photograph boards, in shop windows. Down in Mumbles, they'd come and take the photos of the show, and then they'd do a huge publicity board, and we'd put that up in windows of shops. So they would do an awful lot of publicity for us, and the local hotels would take flyers and encourage their guests to come and see the shows. So it was very much a community theatre. And as I said earlier, you had the gang shows. John loved doing the gang shows. You had Alex Frith, the marvellous Alex Frith, doing her Bumble shows. Ros Taylor doing her shows for young performers. And we also had school productions. They used to invite the schools to come in and do little extracts from shows. And of course it was a huge thing for the schools to come in and do their own productions. And it was just wonderful to see the community being serviced by the Grand. And I hope they continue to do this. I wish every possible success to Grand Ambition, because I think their ideas of bringing back the Grand as a community theatre is absolutely wonderful. My son worked for several of the local companies, Frapetsus and Llewellyn, and did a lot of shows up in the arts wing. But there was this lovely piece in the Post. This is 2011, and they were doing a marvellous show called Bread in Heaven, which was a sequel to the Grand Slam series on television, when they did the wonderful Grand Slam series. And Sean Probert came to revise his role as Maldwyn Novello Pugh, and we packed the Grand. But my son Tom was in it, and so the Grand did this wonderful article on the fact that now it was a second generation appearing in the Grand, so we were keeping it in the family. And of course Nia Trusler has appeared in many productions here, as her mum Menna did before her. So you just get that feeling, Will on the crew, who is so fantastic here, is Tina Williams' son. I remember him being born. So you just feel there's a family feel here and a community feel to the theatre, and I hope that goes on. I know it's difficult financially, and I'm hopeless with money, but I know it's difficult to make ends meet. But when we had the 125th anniversary show, what a fantastic show, local talent, and the theatre was packed, absolutely packed. So it can be done. People will come and see local talent, and I hope that the legacy will be that we encourage particularly young performers to come and perform in this wonderful space which is so dear to so many of us. Well, I've worked with quite a few famous names in my career, thanks to John giving me my equity card. One of my favourites was the lovely Phyllis Calvert, who of course had been a film star in her heyday, and we were on tour with a production of Crown Matrimonial in which she was playing Queen Mary. And theatrical etiquette then was very important. You always referred to her as being Miss Calvert. until she would say to you, "Oh, darling, I think we've known each other long enough. Call me Phyllis." And every night after the show, she would spend time dressing up, doing her makeup, doing her hair, and wearing nice clothes before she went through the stage door, because there were loads of her fans outside the stage door. And I said to her, "Why do you go to such lengths to look so beautiful coming out of the stage door when the rest of us are slinking out in jeans and hoodies and anoraks?" And she said, "Darling, they remember me from my Hollywood days, and I was a glamorous film star." And she said, "Do you think they would want to see somebody slinking out in jeans and hoodies? They want to see a glamorous film star coming through that stage door, and that's what I give them." And then she told me a lovely story about going to Romford Market during the war, because she was a great seamstress. She loved sewing, Phyllis. And she wanted to buy zips, and she'd heard they had them on this stall in Romford Market. So she said, "I just made, I think it was Madonna of the Seven Moons with Stuart Granger." And she said, "I went up to this stall and there were two young girls behind the table, and they were talking. They'd obviously been to the cinema and they'd seen this film, and they were talking about it and saying, 'Oh, wasn't she beautiful? Phyllis Carver, oh, she was so lovely. Stuart Granger, oh, and that scene when they were together at the end, oh, it was wonderful.'" So she said, "I couldn't resist it, so I leant over and I said, 'Excuse me, I overheard you talking about the film, and I'd just like to let you know that I am Phyllis Calvert.'" And she said there was a moment, and the two girls looked at each other, and then they said, "I bet she wishes she was." Well, I'd like to finish on a poem, What I Wrote. I've had 3 books of poems for children published over the last 10 years or so, which have been very popular. And one of them is called Theatre Ghosts, and it's dedicated to Swansea Grand Theatre. So perhaps you'll indulge me and let me finish on this. "Here in the dark auditorium, the ghosts of the actors roam. Here you'll find jolly comedians or ever so dramatic tragedians who made the audiences cheer or moan. Here on these well-trodden boards has been many a pantomime. Oh, no, he didn't. Oh, yes, he did. It's right behind you. Did you boo me then, kid?" Cheering to the very last line. Here in these wings lurk the dancers, whose ballet or tap filled the show, with high kicks and with twirls, with point work or with whirls. So gracefully we watched them go. Under these lights stood the actors, declaiming their lines from the bard, to be or not to be in this play. Lend me your ears, and I'll do it my way. You see, Shakespeare's not really so hard. There in that bright spotlight has stood the humblest peasant or queen, princesses and dragons, Mother Courage and her wagon, so many delights in each scene. This stage has been peopled with creatures, from rabbits to sheepdogs or mice. There's both ends of a horse, and Jack's cow, of course, and the ogre who changed in a trice. In curtain calls, stars and unknowns, and the audience clapped loud and long. So the next time you're here, let's hope you'll all cheer, as the magic of this theatre lives on.